Arch Manning has been famous longer than most quarterbacks have been evaluated. That is the first thing that makes his story different. Before he became the starting quarterback at Texas, before the National Football League draft projections, before the #1 pick conversation, Arch was already living under a spotlight most players never experience. The name did that. Manning, Archie, Peyton, Eli, Cooper. A football family that does not just carry history, but expectation. And for Arch, that expectation arrived early. People did not wait until he started college games to compare him to the future. They did not wait for the production. They did not wait for the tape to settle. The conversation started when he was still in high school. That is the blessing and the burden. The name gets attention, but attention is not proof. And that is why 2026 matters so much. Because Arch Manning is no longer just the most famous quarterback in college football. He is trying to become the best quarterback in the 2027 National Football League draft. That is a different thing. Fame can open the conversation. Tape has to finish it. So the question now is simple. Can Arch Manning become the #1 pick? Not because of the last name, not because of the recruiting ranking, not because of the hype, but because the player finally becomes undeniable. That is the story. Arch came out of Isidore Newman School in New Orleans, carrying one of the most unusual profiles in modern recruiting. He had the bloodline, he had the size, he had the arm, he had the athleticism, he had the polish, and he had a national media cycle waiting on every throw. In high school, the numbers backed up the attention. More than 8,500 passing yards, more than 100 passing touchdowns, more than 9,700 total yards of offense, more than 100 total touchdowns. He broke school records connected to Peyton and Eli Manning. He became a 5-star recruit. He was ranked at or near the top of the 2023 class by major recruiting services. Alabama wanted him. Georgia wanted him. Ole Miss had the family connection. Every major program understood what landing Arch Manning would mean. But he chose Texas. And that decision mattered because Texas already had Quinn Ewers. Arch did not walk into Austin and immediately become the face of the program. He waited. That is one of the most important parts of his story. In modern college football, quarterbacks do not always wait. They transfer. They chase starting jobs. They look for faster paths. Arch stayed. In 2023, he played limited snaps and effectively redshirted. In 2024, he worked behind Ewers, but started to show flashes when Texas used him in packages or spot starts. He completed 67.8% of his passes for 939 yards, 9 touchdown passes, and 2 interceptions. He added rushing production too, including 4 rushing touchdowns. That season gave people a preview. The arm was real. The movement was real. The athleticism was better than some expected. But the full story had to wait. Then 2025 arrived. The first year as the full starter. The year where the famous backup became the actual face of Texas. And that is when the real evaluation began. Arch's first starting season was not perfect. That is important, because this is not the story of a player who stepped onto the field and immediately erased every question. Texas entered the season with massive expectations. Arch entered it with even more. And early in the year, the pressure showed. There were growing pains. There were turnovers. There were games where the timing did not always feel clean. There were moments where the name was bigger than the performance. That is what made the second half of the season important. Arch got better. The offense settled. His confidence grew. His playmaking became louder. And the reason the #1 pick conversation survived is because the season finished with evidence that looked a lot more like the future people had imagined. The Mississippi State game showed resilience. Arch threw for 346 yards and 3 touchdown passes. He added a rushing touchdown. Texas erased a 17-point deficit and won in overtime. That matters because quarterbacks trying to become franchise prospects are not only judged when everything is clean, they are judged when the game starts going sideways. Then came Arkansas. That was the explosion. Arch threw for 389 yards and 4 touchdown passes. He added a rushing touchdown. He even caught a touchdown on a trick play, passing, rushing, and receiving in the same game. That is the kind of performance that turns hype back into excitement. It showed the full skill set, the arm, the creativity, the mobility, the ability to create explosive offense in different ways. And then came the Citrus Bowl against Michigan. That may have been the cleanest statement of his season. Arch threw for 221 yards and 2 touchdown passes. But the bigger headline was what he did with his legs. 9 carries, 155 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, a 60-yard run. Citrus Bowl most valuable player. Texas beat Michigan 41-27, and suddenly the story of his first starting season felt different, not flawless, but ascending. By the end of 2025, Arch had thrown for 3,163 yards, 26 touchdown passes, and 7 interceptions. He added 399 rushing yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. That is a real starting quarterback season, not just a famous last name season, a real one. But the National Football League does not draft quarterbacks at number 1 overall because the season was real. It drafts them there because the projection feels safe enough, special enough, and complete enough to build a franchise around. That is where 2026 becomes the proving ground. Real quick, if you're loving this deep dive, hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss another player journey. Arch could have tested the 2026 draft conversation. Instead, he returned to Texas. And that decision makes sense. The first starting season gave him production, but it also left questions. A second season gives him the chance to sharpen the parts of his game that still need to become automatic. The decision-making, the accuracy under pressure, the internal clock, the ability to start faster, the ability to play his best against elite defenses. That is what separates a top prospect from the number 1 pick. And Arch's situation is fascinating because he is not only being judged against himself, he is being judged against the class. We just told the Dante Moore story on FootballRealm. Moore has the Oregon production, the accuracy, the return to school bet, and a real quarterback 1 argument. CJ Carr has the efficiency and the Notre Dame spotlight. Lenora Sellers has the athletic ceiling. Other quarterbacks will rise because that is how draft cycles work. Arch's advantage is the full package: size, arm strength, mobility, SEC experience, Steve Sarkisian's offense, a famous football education, and enough late-season growth to make evaluators believe the best version may still be coming. But the name does not answer the hardest questions. It only makes more people watch while he answers them. That is the real tension of Arch Manning. The Manning legacy helps him. There is no reason to pretend otherwise. It gives him visibility. It gives him familiarity. It gives him access to football knowledge most quarterbacks could only dream of having. It gives teams a comfort level with the way he was raised around the position. But it also raises the bar. When Arch plays well, people say he was supposed to. When he struggles, people ask if the hype was too much. That is the trap of being famous before being fully proven. And that is why 2026 has to become the season where the conversation changes from who he is related to what he is on tape. The traits are there. At 6'4" and 226 pounds, he has the frame teams want. He can drive the football. He can push the ball downfield. He can move better than the stereotype of a Manning quarterback suggests. He is a legitimate red zone running threat. He can create with his legs when the play breaks down. That part gives him a modern quarterback element. He is not just a pocket statue. He's not just a name in a classic mold. He has the tools to fit the way the National Football League is evolving. But the next step is control. The number 1 pick cannot just have flashes. The number 1 pick has to make the offense feel stable. The number 1 pick has to protect the football. The number 1 pick has to win from the pocket, win on schedule, win off script, and win when the defense knows exactly what is coming. That is the standard. For Arch, the path is clear. He needs a more consistent 2026. He needs fewer early mistakes. He needs cleaner accuracy. He needs big games against the best teams on the schedule. He needs Texas back in the national picture. And he needs to make the quarterback race feel less like a debate. Because right now, the debate is real. Dante Moore has an argument. CJ Carr has an argument. The rest of the class has time to build one. Arch Manning has the loudest name, but the number 1 pick has to become more than the loudest name. That is what makes this season so compelling. This is the year where the projection either sharpens or gets challenged. The year where the second season as starter either turns him into the clear favorite or leaves the door open for someone else to take the top spot. The year where Texas becomes his proof. Not Quinn Ewers' team anymore. Not the famous recruit waiting his turn. Not the nephew of two Super Bowl quarterbacks. Arch Manning, Texas starter, 2027 National Football League draft headliner, potential #1 pick. That is the journey now. The high school legend, the patient backup, the first-year starter with real production and real flaws, the late-season riser, the quarterback who came back to finish the job, the prospect trying to close the gap between famous and undeniable. Can Arch Manning become the #1 pick? If 2026 turns the hype into proof, the answer may define the entire 2027 National Football League draft. That's the story in Football Realm. If you love deep player journeys, hit subscribe and join the realm. Drop your thoughts below. Who do you want profiled next?